Let's create some simple plastic materials. To start, let's create this black shiny plastic. So first thing you gotta do when creating any material is try to see the diffuse color. So for this black shiny plastic, the diffuse color is obviously black. So let's create a new V-Ray material. Name it plastic black shiny and set the diffuse color to black. I'm using value 1. You do not want to use 0 because that can cause some problems with rendering. So set it to 1. And this is the basic diffuse for our plastic material. So next step is the reflections. So look at this image, and as you can see, this plastic is pretty reflective. And the reflections are pretty sharp. They are not completely sharp, but they are pretty sharp. So first of all, set reflect to something like 140. Enable Fresnel reflections. You can see them clearly here on the edges. The reflections are much stronger than the parts that are facing you. So this means you need to use the Fresnel. And set the Fresnel to 1.45. Okay, now let's blur the reflections a little bit by lowering the glossiness value. Let's try 0.95. Okay, let's assign to our torus knot and make a simple test render. The result looks pretty good. Compare it to our reference image. In this image the blacks are darker than our rendering, but that can be easily fixed in post-production. You can even fix it in V-Ray frame buffer. Just enable the color curve correction and set the curve like this. Looks pretty similar to my eye. So one more thing we want to do with this material . I'm going to use one of my dirt maps, for example DR7. And use the value of reflect map to mix it with the reflect color. Let's try 20 or 30. Okay. And now let's use the same map in the BAM slot. Paste instance. You want to check out how it looks on the model. Show in viewport. Fix the tiling like this. And set the bump value pretty low. Something like 5 might be good. Okay. Let's see how it looks. So this looks pretty good. I think this material might be ready. One more thing we want to do. Let's try using our reflect map in the reflect glossiness slot as well. Copy, paste, instance, and reduce the glossiness to 1 or 2 or 4. Okay, 5. Try it out. These little details, these maps in the reflect slot and the bump slot are not actually necessary, but they help with realism aspect of the material. The renderings will be longer, but the material will look much more realistic. So that's our black shiny plastic material. Now we can easily modify it to make some more materials. So drag and drop to another slot, and let's make a matte material. Rename to plastic black matte, and simply reduce the reflection glossiness to create a matte material. Let's try 0.7. Assign to the torus knot. And it's a nice matte plastic. Something like this cup here. Maybe the reflections are a bit too strong for this one. So let's reduce the reflections to, let's say, 80. Try again. So this looks pretty good. And cancel. Now to change the color of this material, you just have to change the diffuse color. Copy the black plastic shiny material to another slot and change the diffuse color to, let's say, orange. And we have orange plastic here. You can use color, texture, whatever in the diffuse slot to give the coloring you need to your material. And it's a nice orange plastic material here. So if you want to save these materials to your library, change the tiling back to 1. And you can use it on whatever objects you want. So let's create some transparent plastics now. Let's start with this white one here. To create it, we can simply copy this black material over here, name it to plastic white transparent. Now, first thing we got to do is again change the diffuse color. Set it to, let's say, 180, 190 white. Reduce the bump to 2. The reflections are a bit blurrier on this one, so reduce the reflection glossiness. Let's try 0.88. Okay. Now, to make it transparent, we need to use the refraction. So set the refraction value to something like this, 180. Maybe a bit less. 160. Reduce the refraction glossiness a little bit. And change the refraction IOR to 1.45. This is a normal value for plastic. So enable affect shadows to get transparent shadows. And let's try a quick test render. Sorry, forgot to assign the material. And let's try it now. Okay, I can already see some problems, so I'm going to cancel. The material actually is more transparent than 160. Let's try 200. And for white materials you want to increase the reflection value, because it's very hard to notice reflections on white. Let's try 180. And reduce the bump to 1. Okay, render now. So this material looks pretty decent, but it's hard to see on a white background. So I'm going to try and change the background to a darker color. Let's try something like this and re-render. Okay, on a darker background it looks very good. Compared to a reference image, I think it's pretty close. So let's move on to the next material and let's try this one. It's also transparent plastic, but it's much shinier and it has a green-blue tint to it. So let's try to emulate that. I'm going to change the background back to a light color. And we're going to create this material from our first black plastic material. Copy it to another slot. And rename. So what we want to do is we're going to give it some refractions. Enable affect shadows. Give it some refractions. And we want to increase the diffuse color to some dark gray. Because plastics are not as clear as glass, so for glass you would use a black color, for plastics you are going to use something gray, like this. Now let's assign it. Now, how do we get the tint, the blue-green color that this plastic has? We're going to use the fog color. Change it to something like this. Let's see how it looks. Okay. So we probably want to make it a bit more refractive. Let's try 235. And let's reduce the fog multiplier a little bit to 0.6. Let's see how this looks. From the light cache preview it looks like the highlights are not as strong as they should be. So I'm going to increase the reflections even more. Okay, confirm that and re-render. So as it's rendering, it looks like the bump is a bit too strong for this one. So I'm cancelling the render and changing the bump to 2 or even 1. Okay. I think this should be okay. Let's see. So that's our clear green plastic material. I think it looks pretty close to our reference image. If you adjust the curves a bit to give it more contrast, looks pretty nice. Okay. Let's move on and make something like this. It's green, it's transparent, and it's matte. So both the reflections and refractions are matte. Plastic transparent, green, matte. So we're going to use the same material we just created. Change the fog color to green. And reduce the refraction glossiness to 0.7. And the reflection glossiness to 0.7 as well. Make the reflections weaker. Okay. A bit more yellow. One thing that you will notice is that if you use fog color at less than 255 lightness value, the preview is simply gray. This is a little glitch that sometimes you want to change the value to 255 to get a better preview, but change it back for final material. Okay, let's see how it looks. Forgot to assign again. Okay. So while looking at my preview, I can already see that it's too transparent. Reduce the refraction to 180. And the diffuse color should be darker. Look at the dark parts of this object. It's not as light, it's not as gray. So set it to 20. Re-render. Looks pretty bad. Let's give some color to the diffuse slot. So it looks like it's actually more transparent than I thought. Let's try a higher refraction value. Okay, getting closer. Okay, so the rendering has finished. Let's compare it to our reference image. Looks pretty close. If we enable the curves color correction and bring up the contrast, it looks even closer. So that's our basic green matte plastic material. And let's leave it at that. So I guess that's it for the plastics. You can spend some time changing colors, changing the amount of glossiness of the reflections and so on, and make a few of those so you don't have to make them afterwards, and save them to a material library so you can pull them out whenever you need them.